everyone, and welcome to the Cyber Minute. This is episode number 2. So last week we talked about risk, the definition of risk, or my definition of a risk. This week we're going to build on that a little bit and talk about risk management. So risk management is made up of 4 steps. Step number 1 of risk management is risk identification. And we talked about that last week when we talked about how to identify a risk. A risk is made up of a threat and a vulnerability. If you don't have both, then you don't have a risk. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is risk assessment. And to assess the risk, we can do that in 2 different ways. Method number 1 is a qualitative risk assessment, and the second method is a quantitative risk assessment. A qualitative assessment deals with a subject matter expert's subjective opinion in determining whether the likelihood and impact are high, medium, or low. Whereas with a quantitative risk assessment, you're using real numbers. The number of suspicious or suspected attacks on your system over the course of a year or 6 months, whether they're successful or unsuccessful. You can have your intrusion detection system, your antivirus, all these different tools can be used to collect these quantitative statistics, but the difference being that they're based on real numbers, time, money, real statistics that you collect over time, whereas with a qualitative assessment, it's based on a judgment. So that's step number 2. Step number 3 of risk management is risk prioritization. So once you have identified and assessed all of your risk, you assign a risk rating to all of your risks, whether it be high, medium, or low. You can then prioritize them. You can place the highs above the mediums, above the lows. If you have multiple highs, then the owner of the system will determine which highs to address first. Typically, you want to address all the highs, any high risks within 30 days, any moderate risks within 60 to 90 days, and low risks maybe 120 days, and maybe not at all. Low risk items, it may cost more to mitigate them or to respond to them than it is to just accept them and keep an eye on them. And then the 4th step of risk management is the risk response. So once you've identified the risk, assessed it, prioritized it, how are you going to respond to it? There are 4 different ways you can respond to risk. Risk response number 1 is probably the one that most people are familiar with, and that's mitigation, which is the same thing as to reduce the risk. Typically, you can't eliminate risk altogether. You can only mitigate or reduce it, but that's the preferred option when possible. Risk response number 2 is acceptance. You're not going to ignore the risk, but you can accept it. You can accept the fact that you have a risk, but you're just not going to allocate resources to do anything about it. Keep it on the risk register, keep an eye on it, but you're not gonna do anything about it. The 3rd response to a risk is avoidance. And you can avoid risk by removing the functionality that brings about the risk. If you don't want users to be able to download media from a computer, then take away the CD-ROM drive, take away the USB functionality, and make it so that you can't, or that the users can't do what you don't want them to do. So that's risk avoidance. And then the 4th and final method for responding to a risk is to transfer it. You can transfer risk by taking out an insurance policy or developing a service level agreement with a service provider. All right, that's it for this week. Let's go ahead and leave it there. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, click the bell, all that good stuff, and I'll see you next week.